Okay, Rob, go ahead. We're good.
All right. Very good. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the primary forum sponsored and organized by the Democratic County parties in Benton, Iowa, and Poweshiek counties. We're delighted you could join us. I'm Rob Hogg, State Senator from Cedar Rapids, and I'm your moderator for today's forum featuring the Democratic candidates for the United States Senate in the June 2nd primary. The winner will be our nominee in this fall's general election to replace the Republican Joni Ernst, who has repeatedly failed Iowans, as she has stood by the Republican Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and the worst president of our lifetimes, Donald Trump, instead of standing up for the people of Iowa. Today's forum is designed to help our candidates showcase their experience, their talents, and their positions on the issues to the people of Benton, Iowa, and Poweshiek counties, the statewide audience that is joining us, and the news media. We want to nominate the best candidate to win the general election and to serve Iowa and our country in the United States Senate. And it is essential that whoever we nominate, we rally together to win this election. Because of the coronavirus epidemic, we are urging Iowans to vote early by mail. All registered voters should have received an absentee ballot request form from the Secretary of State's office. If you have not already received a ballot, please fill out that form and mail it in to get your ballot. A ballot must be requested by Friday, May 22nd. If you have not received a ballot request form or you're not registered to vote at your current address, please contact your local county auditor directly. And then once you have received your ballot, please fill it out and mail it in as soon as you are ready, but you must mail it in by Monday, June 1st in order for your vote to count. We also want to thank those people as we start today who are working so hard on our behalf during the coronavirus epidemic. As we speak, over 68,000 Americans have died in the last 2 months from this epidemic. Let's take a moment to thank the healthcare workers, the direct care workers, the child care providers, the public safety workers, the correctional staff, the public employees, and the food industry workers who have devoted so much effort to saving lives and to help us make us safely through this epidemic. Thank you. We also want to thank the Iowans who have served and are serving our country in the armed forces. Let's take a moment to honor our veterans, our active duty personnel, and our reserves and our members of the Iowa National Guard. We especially remember those who have died in service to our country. Thank you. We're just about to begin, but I also want to thank our state legislative candidates who are joining us today from Benton, Iowa, and Poweshiek counties. Candidates for State Senate District 38, Ivy Schuster and Alvin Aragon, and State House candidates Ruby Boddicker in House District 75 and Sarah Smith in House District 76. Thank you for running, and to the audience watching today, please remember to support our down ticket candidates who are running for state and county offices. They are critical for good public policy and effective public service. And along with our county parties, they are the backbone of our state party. I can tell you from experience, you can make a real difference by helping our candidates for state legislature and also county offices. The Benton, Iowa, and Poweshiek County Democrats will be hosting these 4 candidates for another forum on Saturday, March 9th at 4 p.m. Now, on with today's forum. We will have a 2-minute opening statement from each candidate in alphabetical order. After that, we will have 3 questions that were submitted by the county parties. Candidates will have 90 seconds to respond to those questions. We also have a timekeeper who will be showing us how much time is left when it's green. The candidates will have time. When it's yellow, it will be 10 seconds. And when it's red, it will be time for them to wrap up their answers. After the county questions, we will have questions that were submitted to the organizers by viewers in advance of today's forum. We received many good questions, and unfortunately, we don't have time to ask them all. So if your question isn't asked, make sure you reach out directly to the candidates to ask. The candidates have not seen the audience questions, and they will be given 60 seconds to respond. Every candidate will be given an opportunity and equal time to answer every question. Each candidate will also be given the opportunity for a 60-second closing statement. I want to tell you that all the candidates have been asked to focus on what they will do and what abilities they bring to the position. Comments about other candidates have been discouraged. This isn't a debate. There won't be time for rebuttals. Audience microphones are muted throughout to avoid background noise. And I do want to remind you, this forum is being recorded and will be available to watch later. So let's begin and meet the candidates. First, I would ask Mike Franken for his opening statement.
Thanks, Rob. Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Franken. My intent is to represent the Democratic Party this November. I'm from rural Sioux County, the father of adopted children, the husband of 31 years, and a retired 3-star admiral. I left Iowa as a young person to join the Navy. I spent the 1980s generally at sea, the 1990s learning all about Washington and getting some grad school done, and the 2000s fighting our nation's war on terror, both in the field and in Washington, D.C. I commanded ships, armada of ships, First Defense Agency. I served on Ted Kennedy's legislative staff early on and did multiple tours on Capitol Hill, including Chief of Legislative Affairs. At one time, I was the senior U.S. military officer on the continent of Africa. I've lived on 4 continents and moved 28 times. I have somewhat of a history of a lot of policy and strategy jobs. In 2002, I was the guy that voted against the war in Iraq. It was a bad war then. It hasn't gotten better with time. I thought it'd be put out to pasture, but ultimately I was brought in to be Secretary Rumsfeld's personal briefer, and mostly because I have no issues holding the line and making informed, courageous, and considered decisions. In 2016, when President Trump won the Electoral College, I decided that it was time to hang up my cleats, do something else, started an international consulting business. At 2018 election, I was very concerned about this president winning the Electoral College again. I wanted to ensure we had a candidate that would negate the things that got Joni Ernst elected to begin with. And so I put my hat in the ring to do that. I'm very pleased to have that opportunity. I'm a very unique candidate. I have climate change. We can go into the specifics of this. Healthcare and Wall Street, greed and corruption are my 3 efforts. I have other economic priorities. Certainly the recovery of this nation post-pandemic is going to be a significant lift. Repairing international relationships, we're going to talk about that in a little bit, and also veterans issues, pretty well schooled in that. There's a fundamental philosophy that fuels my effort. That is a 40-year effort of service to this nation. I don't want to see it go in vain. And there's one thing I learned: good governance and Iowa values are connected most heartedly. And I will work to the beginning of my ability, going to Wall Street on day 1, or correction, to the Hill day 1, and work to the best of my ability. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Now for an opening statement from Kimberly Graham.
Thank you, everyone. I'm going to set my timer and some effort to stay in my 2 minutes here. I appreciate this event today and the opportunity to talk to more voters, since we can't talk to you in person anymore, unfortunately, for a while. My name's Kimberly Graham. I'm running for United States Senate. I have a plan for this, and it has 2 parts. The first part is to repeal and replace Joni Ernst, which of course is critically important. She has been no friend to regular Iowans. The second part is to become the best senator that money can't buy. Best senator money can't buy. That's our campaign slogan for a very deliberate and important reason. It's not just that it's a catchy slogan. It's because the reason that we don't have so many things that regular everyday working people in this country need to live lives of health and dignity is because of the oversized influence of corporate money in politics and of the very extraordinarily wealthy in politics. We have failed to invest adequately in our people in this country. And we have got to have people in DC who are willing to stand up and fight for people that typically might not have as big a seat at that table or no seat at all. 40 years ago, the top 10% of people in this country controlled roughly 1/3 of its wealth. Today, the top 10% of people in this country control about 75% of this nation's wealth. And that shows absolutely no signs of slowing down until or unless we get a critical mass of regular people who are not wealthy or well-connected into positions of power in Congress. People who are not going to vote for another tax break for the already wealthy, who really don't need the investments in them. I'm a mom. I have a 20-year-old son, Max. I have a fiance, David. I have a dog here, so if he starts barking, that's why I'm here alone with the dog. My dad is one of 15 siblings from Central Iowa. My mom was a teenage mom and dropped out of high school to have me. I'm a first-generation college student, and I know what it's like to decide whether to pay your mortgage or your health insurance premium because you don't have the money for both. And I hope to have the opportunity to continue and stand up and fight for Iowans in the US Senate like I have for the last 20 years in the Iowa courts as an attorney for abused kids. Thanks.
Thank you, Kimberly. Now for an opening statement from Theresa Greenfield.
Well, thank you, Rob, and it is a delight to be here and introduce myself to so many of you. I really appreciate all that you do. Candidates, we can't win alone, and it's the hard work of the county parties that really make the difference and get our candidates, whether they're running for something in the courthouse or the President of the United States, across that finish line. And I'm thrilled to be here to make the case why I am the best candidate to defeat Senator Joni Ernst this fall. I'm Theresa Greenfield. I'm running for the United States Senate. I'm a businesswoman. I'm a mother of 4, and I'm a feisty farm kid. And I'm not taking one dime of corporate PAC donations, not at all. You know, I grew up on a little farm outside of a town of 500 and at a high school class of just 24. And I came of age during the farm crisis when interest rates were 21%. I know about hard work and I know about hard times. And I'll tell you what, our farm families, our small manufacturers, our main streets, they're going through hard times again. Net farm income is down 75% since 2013. Bankruptcy rates are an 8-year high. And Senator Joni Ernst, she's been no friend to our farmers. I'm in this fight though for hardworking families too. You know, for me, I carry their fight in my heart because I was widowed at the age of 24. And my first husband, Rod, was a lineman for the power company. He was a member of IBEW, so we're a union family. And I'll tell you what, on the day he died, and I became a single mom with a 13-month-old and another one on the way, I didn't know how I was going to make ends meet. I thought I was going to go to poverty. But I tell you what, Social Security and hard-earned union benefits kept me out of poverty, gave me that hand up. And so when Senator Joni Ernst talks about privatizing Social Security, going behind closed doors to gut it, I said, no way, and I got in this race. I am thrilled to be here. You know, I'm thrilled with the strong grassroots team that we have built. We've had over 15,000 contributions from Iowans at all 99 counties. Over 20 unions and organizations have endorsed our campaign. And last week, the AFL-CIO endorsed too. So I'm excited to be here tonight and look forward to hearing from you and having conversation about how we can get results for Iowans. Thank you.
Thank you, Theresa. Now for an opening statement from Eddie Mauro.
Thank you, Senator Hogg, and thank you for all that are joining us here today. I'm here because rural Iowans are looking for a leader that'll address the problems facing rural communities with the courage and the urgency that this moment in time demands. And my roots in rural communities run very deep, not just growing up, but to this day, which connects me to rural Iowa like no other. Today, I'm a proud father of twins and blessed with a wonderful wife of 30 years. But I came from humble beginnings. You see, my mom, she cleaned houses for a living. My dad, after he left the Navy, became a lifelong teacher and coach, which is all I ever wanted to be. That's what I became. So I was a teacher and a coach in rural communities like Wayne County, Boone County, Warren County. Today, I'm a small business owner that impacts every county in Iowa. And I've been involved in community service and advocacy outreach over a lifetime of work on behalf of rural Iowa. And I bring a level of preparedness and leadership in crisis management that's unparalleled, having led a business through 2 crises and now a third, leading other small businesses throughout the state to do the same. And I'm working with communities throughout Iowa and the world during this very difficult time. I can tell you, people are yearning for honesty, yearning for truth, even if it's hard truth. People are looking for empathetic leaders that listen, understand, and act. So I don't just talk about improving rural schools and rural hospitals and mental health services. I don't just talk about creating a fair economy that includes rural business and workers and a farm bill that truly meets the needs of the family farmer first. I walk the walk. And nobody in this field has been grounded in the rural communities and has worked to improve the lives of rural Iowans in the ways that I have, especially Joni Ernst. And right now, rural Iowans need a voice in the US Senate who offers leadership, who offers honesty, who offers empathy, someone that can deliver action and who understands you. And I want to be a voice for rural Iowans. And together, we're going to build a better rural America. And I'm so grateful to be here and answer your questions. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Eddie. And now an opening statement from Cal Woods.
Thank you, Rob. I grew up on a Lynn County hog farm. My dad was also a factory machinist at Universal Engineering in Cedar Rapids, a member of the Machinist Union for 35 years. My mom worked at the Mount Vernon Bakery. I graduated from high school and joined the Navy at 17. I served on board the USS Chicago, a guided missile cruiser in the Western Pacific in the navigation department. Graduated from the University of Iowa after that and worked for 16 years as a reporter in Colorado and Iowa. And I'm running for the United States Senate because we have some very serious challenges ahead of us, and they haven't been addressed by our junior senator, Joni Ernst, right now. We have a healthcare system that has left about 20 million Americans or more uninsured or underinsured. And I think this pandemic has been a good reminder of the importance of our healthcare system, and maybe kind of a gut check that we need to devote more resources to our healthcare system. I'm fairly confident if we have a Democratic Senate a year from now that we'll be working on a healthcare bill that will cover every American with quality, affordable healthcare. I'm not quite as optimistic on our climate crisis. We have a climate crisis and it's reaching existential proportions. If we're going to tackle our climate crisis, and it will be an epic battle, it'll be a knockdown, drag out, Donnybrook of a street brawl. We have to send people to Washington who are ready to fight for our climate crisis. You know, Joni Ernst was picked from relative obscurity in the summer of 2013 by the Koch brothers. They invited her to the Billionaires Retreat, and she accepted their endorsement, and they threw millions of dollars to her campaign. The Koch brothers don't invest in a candidate without expecting return on their investment, and from Joni Ernst, they've gotten it. On the renewable fuel standard waivers that our president handed out like candy to even the large refineries, Joni Ernst, from her we heard nary a whimper. On the Wall Street tax cut that Steve Mnuchin, our Treasury Secretary, told us was going to stimulate the economy so much that it would pay for itself and start to pay down the national debt. Instead, we've added $1 trillion to our national debt, even before the COVID-19 crisis. And from Joni Ernst, we heard nary a whimper. So the Koch brothers have gotten a very good return on their investment. And let's remember, the Koch family got their early money back in the 1930s. Charles and David's father, Fred Koch, built refineries for Joseph Stalin and the communists. And just a few years later, he built refineries for Adolf Hitler and the Nazis, especially the refineries that would supply the high-octane fuel to fuel those Nazi fighter planes that attack American and Allied troops. So we need to remember where the Koch brothers' money came from and where Joni Ernst got her start. So we need to send someone to Washington who's going to fight for our healthcare system, fight for our climate, and fight for Iowans. Thank you.
Thank you, Cal. Thank you all for your opening statements. Now for the first question prepared by the organizers from the Iowa County Democrats, and we will start with Eddie Mauro. As of today, there are 9,169 confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Iowa. 184 of our fellow Iowans have died from this disease. We mourn their loss and urgently hope for this epidemic to end. The current crisis has highlighted the ongoing stress for our rural healthcare system. Eddie, what sort of relief and/or policies would you propose to keep rural hospitals running successfully?
Yeah, so first of all, we need to include our rural hospitals in any stimulus packages that are being passed. They've been left behind. Our Medicare reimbursement rates and other programs have really left many of our critical access hospitals without the resources they need, both to support basic services, but also to recruit, train, and retain quality healthcare staff, nurses, doctors, and so much more. I think second, I proposed, if you go to our website, you'll see we're already calling on a new frontier public health corps. I've been calling for the U.S. To create a Peace Corps-like effort for public health that would focus on recruiting both new and retired healthcare professionals to come and work in Iowa's rural communities and other underserved areas. Then those professionals, whether they're CNAs, nurses, or in other disciplines, should also be cross-trained to provide mental health services. We're in the midst of Mental Health Month here in the month of May, making sure we're also providing basic nursing services and primary care for our seniors. And as a U.S. Senator, I'll lead hearings about the privatization of Medicaid in Iowa and other states and work to repeal Medicaid privatization. It's failed us, and it's been particularly devastating for Iowa's rural communities, especially during this era of COVID. And COVID-19 has also demonstrated that we must make sure that healthcare is there for every American. A massive public healthcare plan that provides healthcare for all Americans, because it's a human right. And what we've seen greatly, especially in the last several weeks, is that how our healthcare tied to employment is so disruptive for the hundreds of thousands of Iowans that have lost their jobs, for the tens of millions that have lost their jobs across the country. We need to make sure we have a forward-thinking and a transformative change to our healthcare structure, and I want to be the leader that does that. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you, Eddie. Next is Kimberly Graham. Kimberly, what sort of relief and/or policies would you propose to keep rural hospitals running successfully?
Thanks, Rob. In the short term, I agree with Eddie about the stimulus package needs to include sufficient help for our rural hospitals. Absolutely. I would also say that we have got to work and move as fast as we humanly possibly can toward a universal single-payer healthcare system. I am the only one that is running for this seat who has said that throughout my campaign and who firmly believes that that is the only way that we are going to get healthcare that is truly accessible, truly affordable for every single person living in the United States of America. We have to ask whether healthcare is really a human right or not. And if we say yes, then the inquiry stops there and we go to a universal single-payer healthcare system. If the answer is no, then we can keep it as it is, and your healthcare will depend on either your job and or at the same time, how much money you have. And I don't believe that that should be the case. However, there's a really big caveat to a universal single-payer healthcare system that exists now and what exists under that system. And that is, we must have an advocate from Iowa in the US Senate who understands that the problem, one of the main problems with rural hospitals is the low reimbursement rates. Rural hospitals and doctors are reimbursed and other healthcare providers at a far too low a rate. We have a disproportionate number of elders living in rural Iowa, and they are on Medicare, and those Medicare reimbursement rates are not sufficient. So we have to have somebody there who understands that and is going to stand up and fight for increased reimbursement rates, because if they're not sufficient, then either way, those rural hospitals are going to be in a lot of trouble. And right now we've got about 18% of Iowa's rural hospitals in real danger of closing in the short term if we don't do something now.
Thank you, Kimberly. Next is Cal Woods. Cal, what sort of relief and or policies would you propose to keep rural hospitals running successfully?
Thank you, Rob. Well, Kimberly's absolutely right. Our reimbursement rates for Medicare are too low, but especially for Medicaid. And we need to, that's something we can do immediately, is to boost the reimbursement rates for Medicaid. Now, we've got a bigger problem with our healthcare system, and that's that we're already wasting more than $600 billion a year on too many other costs other than taking care of patients. We spend about 20 cents of our healthcare dollar on insurance companies because they have to pay marketing and advertising and salespeople and CEO salaries. And if it's a for-profit company, their shareholders want a return on their investment. We spend another 30 cents of our healthcare dollar on the amount that we waste for administrative costs, and about another 12 cents of our healthcare dollar, the amount that we overpay for pharmaceuticals. That's 62 cents of our healthcare dollar before we even get to the doctors and nurses and CNAs who actually take care of us when we get sick or hurt. So if we can get to a public option, a single payer, universal healthcare, we can eliminate not all, but most of those costs and have money left over to make sure that every single American, those 20-some million Americans who are now uninsured or underinsured, have healthcare. that we can have reimbursement rates for rural hospitals that are comparable to what we have in our urban hospitals. And we can, if we set an ambitious goal, you know, the doctors and the leaders at hospitals like Mayo Clinic and Johns Hopkins University, they got to be world-class hospitals because they decided to do that. If we as America, where we already spend about $11,000 per man, woman, and child for healthcare, more than any other country in the world, if we decide to have a world-class healthcare system, we can do that. We just need to, and we don't have to add any more money to the system. We just need to reallocate money away from insurance companies, away from administrative costs, and away from the amount that we overpay for pharmaceuticals, and focus on doctors and nurses. And let's not forget the CNAs who actually take care of us when we get sick or hurt. Thank you.
Thank you, Cal. Next is Mike Franken. Mike, what sort of relief and or policies would you propose to keep rural hospitals running successfully?
Well, thank you all. Well, good answers, I thought, thus far. Number one, we should not walk into a problem. So the governor has opened up 77 counties. So what you've done is compromise many rural hospitals, compromise the nation's food supply by providing the bleed off of from other counties into some of our rural counties, which are hugely jeopardized by not having a lot of ICU beds and not having the size of hospital that permit COVID plus non-COVID patients to be co-located. So, I mean, there's some coordination that needs to be done on a regional basis that I would urge the administrators to do throughout the state. But the larger issue is the healthcare system in the United States is demonstrably feeble. We know it is. Consequently, a comprehensive plan, as Cal's addressing, is most needed. That's the long game. The near-term game is let's ensure that the next iteration of the CARES bill addresses the shortcomings in rural hospitals. We're generally given short shrift. We know that, and we should be very careful in ensuring that we get our fair share in rural hospitals. We should look at what's necessary for an ICU bed specifically for a COVID patient. The entire suite for the practicalities need not be installed. So maybe there's an ad hoc situation where we can look for secondary measures. We need to brace up our community healthcare centers so that non-COVID patients can use that. And we should also do a Medicare option and address a short-term opportunity where people can opt into Medicare if they are not do not have a provider to use the secondary issues associated with the COVID where they may need assistance. So thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you, Mike.
Yep.
Next is Theresa Greenfield. Theresa, what sort of relief and or policies would you propose to keep rural hospitals running successfully?
Well, thanks, Rob, and thanks, Iowa County, for the question tonight. You know, during tough times like these, we have got to come together to tackle this crisis. And I believe healthcare is a right. It is not a privilege. And I do believe COVID-19 has put a spotlight on the inequities in our healthcare, and in particular when it comes to our rural healthcare systems. You know, I've had the chance to travel across the state. I kicked off my Here in the Heartland tour at the Boone County Hospital, and I went there to hear about the needs of their community, the patients they serve, but also got the chance to sit down and talk about their business and their struggles to stay open. And of course, what I learned, what we know, is that Medicaid expansion has been a lifeline to our rural healthcare systems and our rural hospitals. They need our support. So to keep our rural healthcare system strong, I propose a few things. One, we need to strengthen and enhance the Affordable Care Act. We need to build a public option so absolutely every Iowan, every American has the healthcare they need, whether it's through an employer or whether it's through that public option. And we need to support Medicare to negotiate for prescription drug prices. Iowans are being gouged by drug companies for these drug prices. And I'll tell you, as I travel the state, people are talking about those costs for their prescription drugs, costs for their premiums and deductibles. They need a public option. What's really important is that Iowans understand that Senator Joni Ernst voted repeatedly to end the Affordable Care Act, which would end Medicaid expansion, which would threaten so many of our rural hospitals. Her votes are to gut your protections for pre-existing conditions. Her votes would kick you off the health insurance if you're a young adult before the age of 26 or after the age of 26. Look, we can't have our rural hospitals' doors closed. We know how important they are to serve our communities, and I look forward to fighting and putting Iowa first.
Thank you, Theresa. Now we're going to go to our second question. And just to remind the timer and the panelists, these are 90-second questions in the audience. The second question was prepared by the organizers from Powesheik County, and we will start with Kimberly Graham. Senator Ernst has supported the Trump administration as it has decimated climate, clean water, and other public health and environmental policies. Kimberly, as our United States Senator, what would you do to act on climate and clean water?
Thanks. Well, one of the main reasons that I am in this race at all is because I have a 20-year-old son. And last summer, my son Max said to me, "Mama, I think I'm going to buy land in North Central Canada." And this was not in the context of a conversation about climate. This was out of the blue. And I said, "Well, why, Max?" And he said, "Because I think it's the only place I might be able to live in 20 or 30 years." So I think any of us who have children or grandchildren are hopefully well aware and hopefully scared for them, because we should be. And I hope that that fear can lead us to action rather than paralysis. But here's the bottom line: until we have an overarching influence of fossil fuel money and corporate lobbyists in Congress, a lot of this action that we have to take that is very aggressive and immediate will not happen. I support the Green New Deal, but that's kind of the floor. That's not the ceiling. We have to do more than that. And I have the endorsement of the Sunrise Movement in Dubuque, Cedar Rapids, and Iowa City, and also Sunrise Movement Iowa, because we have taken such aggressive, immediate platform positions to address the climate crisis. It has to be done now.
Thank you, Kimberly. Next is Theresa Greenfield. Theresa, as our United States Senator, what would you do to act on climate and clean water?
Thanks, Rob. Well, we must confront climate change. We know the science is clear about this. We have a man-made global climate crisis on our hands, and we have to take urgent action. You know, I had the chance to visit a family down in Pacific Junction and walked and saw their home where they had 9 feet of water in it. I know that their dreams for their little farmstead are gone. Iowans now know what climate change looks like. It looks like the flooding in Southeast Iowa, the flooding in Southwest Iowa, the 3-inch rains that come on a regular basis, the high temperatures, the high humidity that affect our agriculture communities. I think we need to focus on a few things. One, reducing our carbon footprint. We do that by getting back into our international accords, by working towards our 2050 net zero emission goals. We can do that. But we also need to boost Iowa's economy. We know the benefits of renewable energy. We now are providing about 40% of our electricity through wind. And that has not only been great for the environment, it's been great for jobs and has created about 10,000 jobs across this state. Look, Iowans need to know that Senator Joni Ernst rejects climate science, dismisses it, and will not take climate action. I'm looking forward to putting Iowa first and taking urgent climate action as your next senator.
Thank you, Theresa. Next is Mike Franken. Mike, as our United States Senator, what would you do to act on climate and clean water?
So as this question comes up, Rob, I keep thinking of more and more things to do. Well, first of all, we need to realize that this is a national security issue. Climate change. It's both divisions from within America and divisions from without. We need to establish regional food production areas, and we can do this with the production of ethanol and grow houses and other things. We need to expand the USDA Conservation Stewardship Program, much like it was designed in the 70s as we aspired to, and then we lost wind during the Reagan years, and the Trump administration has denuded it. We need to follow the law as it's written against the ethanol for the ethanol industry and against the RFS exclusions that this administration has willy-nilly offered. We need to enforce antitrust legislation. Don't let the oligarchs control our future, a few companies. We need to reinforce CAFE standards. And we need to use this opportunity as we see our fuel production going up and our usage ultimately going down, not rising to the same standard. We need to get rid of coal, get rid of fuel oil, and ultimately see a horizon for the end of natural gas in the production of energy in this nation. Iowa is in the catbird seat. We can do better. This is a scientific and a policy effort. And I look forward to leading it, not being a follower, leading it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Next is Eddie Mauro. Eddie, as our United States Senator, what would you do to act on climate and clean water? Eddie, hold up. We're having some technical difficulties.
How's that?
All right, now we're ready.
So I had the great pleasure to sit down with Vice President Joe Biden right before the caucuses. We spent about 20 minutes together. And I told him, I said, there's a good chance you could be the next president of the United States. And I'm going to be the next senator from the state of Iowa. And we're going to do some great things together. And I'm looking forward to first going to his office and demanding that he declares a national emergency so we can mobilize all the resources in the federal government on this very important issue. I want to ask him to rejoin the Paris Climate Accord. It's so important that we're working together as a world community to combat this issue, just like we're trying to work together as a world community to combat COVID. I want to support a Green New Deal. It's created a framework for the US to get to net zero emissions by 2030. 2050, as Theresa mentioned, that's not fast enough. Third, we need to put a price on carbon and return the revenue generated to Americans in the form of a carbon dividend. And finally, we need a cap and trade system, narrowly tailored to spur investment in soil health, carbon sequestration, and helping Iowa's farmers lead the way on making a profit from providing environmental services. You know, Iowa should be at the forefront of this solution. Soil regeneration and carbon sequestration as part of the cap and trade system can create new jobs, new revenue for struggling family farmers. All that said, we can't get any of this done unless we confront power and money in politics. Joni Ernst has denied the science because of the heavy influence of special interest money. But that is not just a Republican problem. The system is broken for both parties. There's candidates even in this primary that have taken hundreds of thousands of dollars from hedge funds tied to the fossil fuel industry. Leadership PACs that are dirty with fossil fuel dollars and Wall Street money are heavily invested in this campaign. We don't get major action on climate change by electing a senator with those sorts of dollars financing their campaigns. We don't win by being just another Joni. That does not move the ball forward, and this issue is too damn important for us not to move the ball forward on. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Eddie. And next is Cal Woods. Cal, as our United States Senator, what would you do to act on climate and clean water?
Rob, the first big problem is we have way too many folks in Washington who are still in denial about our climate crisis and the cause of our climate crisis. Our United States military, that no one would accuse of being a bunch of environmentalists and tree huggers, they're already making contingency plans for the eventuality, not of millions, but tens of millions of climate refugees. People have been forced out of their homes because of flood or forced off of their farms because of drought. There are islands in the Pacific, in the Marshall Islands, where those folks are already planning for or trying to figure out what's going to happen when the oceans rise, when their taro fields are flooded, when their freshwater wells are flooded with seawater. Are they still a nation? Do they still have a seat at the UN? Do they still have fishing rights? And where will they go? This climate crisis is real. It's already happening. And we need to address it now. Number one, we need to phase out the $26 billion welfare check that we send to the fossil fuel industry every year in the form of tax credits. We need to phase in more research and development on battery technology, on solar and wind. Number three, we need to make permanent the solar investment tax credit, which is set to phase out in just 2 years in 2022. As it is right now, if you put solar panels on your roof at home, you can get about a 26% tax credit to help pay for those solar panels, which over time will pay for themselves and which will make our air cleaner and greener and have less carbon. Number four, we need to provide an incentivize our farmers to plant more cover crops, leave more stover in the field, do more crop rotation, and actually bring more livestock out onto the fields, all which will help reduce our carbon footprint. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Cal. Now for the third question that was prepared. This one was prepared by the organizers from the Benton County Democrats. And for this one, we will start with Theresa Greenfield. Our relationships with our allies around the world have been eroding under the current administration. Theresa, what strategies should the United States put forward to continue and or repair those relationships?
Yeah. Well, thank you to Benton County Dems for the question and the chance to join you today. Strong international relationships are fundamental for peace and for prosperity, and certainly for Iowans' pocketbooks, that's for sure. And I will tell you, as a United States Senator, my first priority will be the health and safety of every American here and abroad. And as the mother of a son in the Army, the United States Army, I take this really personal. The decisions that we're going to make in the United States Senate, they're going to be solemn. We're going to be deciding whether we send our sons or daughters into harm's way. Now, I will never forget my son when he was on his first deployment. You worry, you don't know. And he sent me a text in the middle of the night that said, just crossed US airspace. I'll call you when I get home. I want everyone who serves to get those kinds of texts. And I'm proud of my son and his service, and I'm proud of everyone who serves. And I'll tell you, the decisions that get made in Washington, they really affect our lives. And right here in Iowa, we know that our international trade decisions are affecting Iowans' lives. I remember the farm crisis. I remember the Russian grain embargo. I remember tractors rolling into Washington, D.C., farmers, manufacturers, our small businesses who lost their markets. And we know if we don't have those strong trade and international agreements, that sometimes we don't get those markets back. We need to fight to get those markets back. We must rebuild our international trade agreements and our international relationships to make sure that Iowans prosper. Thank you.
Thank you, Theresa. Next is Cal Woods. Cal, what strategies should the United States put forward to continue and or repair its relationships with countries around the world?
What a very appropriate question right now, Rob, because it seems like our president has done everything he can do to alienate some of our best friends and to cozy up to some of the worst dictators in the world in North Korea, the Philippines, and Russia and China. So we need to reach out to our friends that have historically been friendly to democracy. And if we're going to have a trade war, trade negotiations, the best way to do that is not unilaterally, but to get together with our other nations who are trading partners, say, for example, with China, because we're going to have a lot more leverage if we deal with China collectively with other nations, with Canada, with Mexico, with Argentina, with Brazil, than as President Trump would have us do it unilaterally. Because when we have those trade wars with China and put tariffs on their goods, they just go to another country. And once we've lost those markets, we may or may not get them back. We need to remember who our friends have been historically. The friends from other democratic countries, other trading partners. We need to shore up our relationships with those other nations, because together, negotiating together with our friends will make us much stronger in dealing with our enemies and adversaries.
Thank you, Cal. Next is Kimberly Graham. Kimberly, what strategies should the United States put forward to continue and or repair relationships with other countries around the world?
Thank you. That's such an important question because as climate sort of devolves around us, if we don't take the necessary actions that we need to stop the climate crisis that we're facing, we are going to increasingly have more and more refugees, climate refugees, and there's going to be more instability in the world if we cannot fix all of this quickly. We need to, first of all, stop looking at foreign policy through the lens of energy and fossil fuels. The United States needs to become energy independent, and we can do that if we focus our research and development and our investment dollars there, so that we are no longer making decisions on foreign policy that really have to do with oil. That shouldn't be how we're making our foreign policy decisions. We need to fully fund the State Department. Under this current administration, the State Department has been gutted and eroded to an absolutely appalling level. And I'm sure that Admiral Franken would back me up on that one, because he knows a lot of people in the State Department. And I know someone who used to work in the State Department as well. We need to participate in the United Nations fully and completely, and we need to be part of that team. We need to invest in humanitarian efforts the world over. We also have to have the right foreign policy and outreach, not the kind of foreign policies, for example, that have resulted in the quagmire that we now have in Central America, that is resulting in hundreds of thousands of asylum seekers at our southern border. The United States foreign policy helped create that situation. And so we've got to make sure that we're investing in foreign aid and that we have a State Department and diplomacy that is working. For every dollar that we spend on diplomacy, we are saving something like $8 to $11, depending on which study you believe, on the cost of war. And the cost of war is not just in dollars and cents, it is in innocent lives. And we have to start putting people over profits in our foreign policy as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Kimberly. Next is Eddie Mauro. Eddie, what strategies should the United States put forward to continue and or repair relationships with countries around the world?
Yeah, you know, ultimately, many of our international relationships are driven by economics. And that's too bad, because in the midst of that type of strategy, we're allowing innocent women and children to be slaughtered in Yemen today. We've allowed too many innocent women and children to be killed and injured in Syria still yet today. The world looks to the United States as an economic superpower because we are one of the linchpins of our increasingly interdependent world. When our leaders fail to look out for our workers, though, when our leaders fail to provide things like healthcare and basic services and human rights protections to our own people, our own workers in these meat processing plants here in this state, it's hard for the United States to exercise any leadership with our allies around the world. But we need to strengthen our trade agreements. We need to strengthen our peace agreements and strengthen our climate agreements. We need a US Senator that will provide the oversight necessary to improve our foreign relations around the world. And we've abdicated that for far too long. Our United States Senate is broken, and we need a transformative leader that wants to go and fix that. I'm a small business owner.
Thank you, Eddie. Thank you. Next is Mike Franken. Mike, what strategies should the United States put forward to continue and or repair relationships with countries around the world?
Thank you, Rob. Well, I was just adding up. My immediate family is responsible for something north of 110 years of diplomatic and national security efforts in my lifetime here. So certainly the Trump administration has subterfuge relations throughout the world, many of which I've been involved in. I wrote 27 international agreements, including an economic agreement with Iran, including the rapprochement plan with the nation of Syria before the conflict started. It's too bad we didn't follow that through. But in quickly of the list, the JICPOA with Iran, we need to get back on board. That's a difficult thing, but we can do it. We need to emphasize a New START agreement. This is a worldwide effort to include other nations, but we shouldn't let China keep us from making this agreement with Russia. We need a plan of action and milestones, a POAM, as we say, because the enemy of peace is instability. So we need to address from peacekeeping troops to climate change, to trade inequities, to natural resource deprivation, to pandemic response, to Paris Peace Accords. All of those issues introduce anxiety and instability. We need to get re-involved with NATO, re-involved with the Shanghai Cooperative, re-involved with the EU, with the AU, et cetera. We need to pass the law of sea. We need to recommit to Article 5 NATO, and the list goes on. But we can't lead internationally if we don't have anybody behind us. And this administration, with a full concurrence of Joni Ernst, with a short observation and an empty perspective, has made us stand alone. And we will lose in the future unless we look more broadly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. And thanks to all our candidates for that round of questions. Now we're going to turn to questions submitted by members of the audience in advance of today's forum. Again, we received many great questions and won't have time to ask them all. So if your question is not asked, please reach out directly to the campaigns. Candidates will have 60 seconds to respond. The first of these questions was submitted by a viewer from North English in Iowa County, and we will start with Cal Woods. Cal, what would you do about the Mitch McConnell situation? How do you make real change if the majority leader refuses to bring meaningful legislation to the Senate floor?
Excellent question. And that makes it all the more critical that we take the Democrats, for the sake of this nation, for the sake of our future, take over the United States Senate. We have an opportunity in Iowa, Colorado, Arizona, Montana, Maine, maybe one or two other states. We need to hold that seat in Alabama. But without Democrats taking over the United States Senate, regaining a majority in the United States Senate, it's going to be very problematic, because Mitch McConnell dedicated himself to being nothing but a roadblock for Barack Obama's more progressive policies, nothing but a roadblock for health care for all. So, and there's even an opportunity. I understand that Mitch McConnell's opponent in Kentucky has a shot at actually taking away Mitch McConnell's seat. So it becomes absolutely critical that we take back control of the Senate, because without that, Mitch McConnell will be nothing but an obstacle, a roadblock for more progressive policies for our healthcare system, for our climate, for minimum wage, and for getting our country back on track and back in good shape.
Thank you, Cal. Next is Mike Franken. Mike, what would you do about the Mitch McConnell situation? How do you make real change if the majority leader refuses to bring meaningful legislation to the Senate floor?
Well, you've got a few tools as a senator. Number one are nominations, maximum subterfuge, maximum committee, hold up internal. This is, you try to befriend. I mean, the best thing to do is to work within. During the Kennedy years in the 90s, we were reasonably successful with this. There was a time in the Bush administration we were reasonably successful with this. I went in and out of Democrat and Republican offices without friction. The problem is this has been a slash and burn psychological operations that the Republican Party has adopted. You win with that, but you also lose terribly with that. They know that. There are Republicans who are who you can speak with, and you can ultimately cajole into working your line of effort, your thought process. We need to also look at our Democratic leadership, perhaps. And I think a majority leader on the Democratic side may be able to repair and have a more clear perspective on the future, and therefore a promising perspective as they see this administration going down, losing by something greater than 8 points come November, where some accommodations will be recognized. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Next is Theresa Greenfield. Theresa, what would you do about the Mitch McConnell situation? How do you make real change if the majority leader refuses to bring meaningful legislation to the Senate floor?
Thanks, Rob. You know, as I crisscross this state, I'll tell you, Iowans are talking about wanting the divisiveness in Washington, D.C. to end. They know that there's an enormous number of bipartisan bills that are sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk, and he is not taking action. Joni Ernst is not doing her job to hear those bills on the Senate floor. Look, Senator Ernst, she told us she was going to be independent and different and make them squeal in Washington. But instead, she has joined party leadership and sides with Mitch McConnell 90 and party leaders 97% of the time. Look, we know that Senator Joni Ernst has taken $1.9 million of corporate PAC donations, and we know that Washington has been corrupted by big money and corporate PACs. I've taken a pledge not to accept one dime in corporate PAC donations, and End Citizens United has endorsed my campaign. And when we get dark money out of politics, we'll get back to doing the work of the American people and end divisiveness and put Iowa first. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Theresa. Next is Kimberly Graham. Kimberly, what would you do about the Mitch McConnell situation? How do you make real change if the majority leader refuses to bring meaningful legislation to the Senate floor?
Thanks for the question. So for the past 17 of my 20-year legal career, in addition to being an attorney for abused kids and for parents in the Iowa courts, I've also been a mediator. I've mediated hundreds of divorces. If you can mediate a divorce where somebody is sitting there talking about time with their children, all of the money that they may have amassed or all of the debt that they may have amassed in their marriage together, talking about the things that matter to them most, their home, their children, then I think those are important skills that may become very, very valuable in the United States Senate. What you learn as a skilled mediator is you learn to actively listen, and you learn to create connection rather quickly, because in this mediation setting, you have about 4 hours, if you're lucky, maybe that long, to mediate someone's entire divorce. So you have to start finding common ground fast, really fast. And you have to make sure that that person understands you are truly listening to them. It is not about coming off of your goals and your positions and capitulating to what the other side wants. It's about starting as a listener. People are far more likely to listen to you if you have first listened to them. And that's something that a lot of people miss. I think you try to start out with a bipartisan act like the American Child Care Act, something that I hope most Republicans would be behind, for universal child care and paid parental leave in this country. We're the only nation without it, the only developed nation without it. And then you work from there and you find as much common ground as you can. Thanks.
Thank you, Kimberly. Next is Eddie Mauro. Eddie, what would you do about the Mitch McConnell situation? What would you do if the majority leader refuses to bring meaningful legislation to the Senate floor?
And this question right here is what separates me from the other candidates. I've been a community organizer. I'm a founding member of an organization here in Central Iowa, known as Amos, that's done some great work for over 20 years. And doing that kind of work, you learn how to organize people. You learn how to gather and focus resources. You learn how to get help from those who didn't always have the courage to lend it. We're doing that right now with meat packers today. And cooperation from people who don't always agree. And those are the skills you need in the United States Senate. And I've done that. I've gone to the Iowa legislature with you, Senator Hogg, and worked with the House and Senate side to help pass legislation that we needed to get both sides to come to the table on, most recently in 2017 on mental health, where we're still woefully behind. But I went and talked to the Farm Bureau who said, no way. I went and talked to some of our rural communities who said, no way. And we find out how we can make a way work. And that's what we're going to need, hypothetically, if Mitch McConnell is still our majority leader. We all hope that he's not. That'll make the world so much easier. But if he is, you need somebody that's gone out and done this already. And I'm the only candidate that has. Thanks for asking.
Okay, thank you, Eddie. The second question submitted by the audience comes to us from a viewer in Urbandale in Polk County. And we will start with Mike Franken. Gun violence is a significant problem in the United States, including murder, domestic abuse, accidents, and suicides. Mike, do you support an assault weapons ban? What are your solutions to reduce gun violence?
Hi, everyone. So I've been working gun issues since about 1996, being born very rural area with gun as a tool in the entryway as you enter the house. So we need to concentrate on responsible gun ownership. Now, having been in charge of thousands of troops in the field as a naval officer, curiously, being responsible for locations in a combat zone, I understand the needed training associated with a military grade weapon, such as we used to be able to buy in a store like Walmart. This is really not necessary in civil society, but until that is done, there are some measures we could be doing, such as limiting magazine size, limiting the accoutrements associated with the weapons, including the rapid fire things, but ultimately look for responsible gun ownership, which means training processes associated with the civilian marksmanship program, such as the military uses to sell its surplus military grade weapons, which is what we do. And in doing so, those weapons, to the best of my knowledge, have never been used in a mass shooting. Why? Because we emphasize responsible gun ownership.
Thank you, Mike. Next, we're going to go to Eddie Mauro. Eddie, do you support an assault weapons ban? What are your solutions to reduce gun violence?
So first of all, yes, we had an assault weapons ban once upon a time, and it demonstrated that we will reduce mass violence in our communities. We need to reinstate that assault weapons ban. Overall, though, we need to talk about all of the injuries and deaths from gun violence. during the course of this conversation here today, there's been domestic violence murders in this state. There's been suicide in this state. We need to talk about holistically about all the things we need to be doing. Background checks for every gun that's sold, universal licensing that takes place, making sure we have a waiting period so that people that might go out and harm themselves or somebody else irrationally might take enough days not to do that. There's so many things we need to be doing, but we can't do that unless we beat back the power and money. And the power and money right now is influencing what's going on. I think it's sinful that Senator Ernst has not moved forward the Violence Against Women's Act to protect women in a meaningful way. We need to have the right kind of leader that can push back against the power and money, not only on this issue, but all the issues that keep us from moving forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Eddie. Next is Theresa Greenfield. Theresa, do you support an assault weapons ban? And what are your solutions to reduce gun violence?
Thanks, Rob. You know, I think we're long past time where we need to enact sensible policies to keep guns out of the hands of people who can hurt themselves and can hurt others. And I grew up on a little farm where certainly we were taught to be responsible gun owners. You know, it was important to fill up the freezer in the fall. And I can tell you, it was a lot of pride. We took some venison sausage to our holiday parties. We also protected our livestock from the varmints. And I know I really enjoyed Sunday afternoons when my dad would throw skeet. I think it's because I was better at it than my brothers. But we do need to take some action. And for me, it starts with, one, passing some bipartisan legislation that would expand universal background checks. We need to close the gun show loopholes. And we need to invest in research. We need to know why we have so much gun violence in this country and what our next steps are and what we can do to end it. And I'll tell you, I am really delighted to be in this race. Both Giffords and the Brady campaign have endorsed my campaign because they know I will take sensible action to reduce gun violence.
Thank you, Theresa. Next is Cal Woods. Cal, do you support an assault weapons ban? And what are your solutions to reduce gun violence?
Absolutely do support an assault weapons ban. We had it in the latter part of the Clinton administration and the beginning of the George W. Bush administration. The roof didn't fall in. No jackbooted thugs went to anybody's door to confiscate their guns. We need to have limits on firepower, and we need to have background checks for every gun sale. Whether you get it at a sporting goods store, at a gun show, or buy one from your next door neighbor, we need to have background checks for everyone to make sure that they're putting guns in the hands of people who are responsible gun owners, who know how to use the guns and are not going to hurt themselves or attack a school or a theater or a concert.
Thank you, Cal. Kimberly Graham, do you support an assault weapons ban? And what are your solutions to reduce gun violence?
Yes, I support the reinstatement of the assault weapons ban. I think it's important to pay attention to the fact that we already had one and that it was allowed to expire. I agree with my dad, who is a former Marine and a Golden Eagle NRA member. My dad has owned many guns all throughout my life, and he's been a hunter and a military service member as well in the Vietnam era. And I was talking to my dad about this after yet another mass shooting last year. And I said, Dad, what do you think? Should that assault weapons ban be, brought back? What are your thoughts on that? And he said in his characteristic way, look, Kimmy, if you need an assault weapon to hunt, you have no business hunting. And if you need an assault weapon for any other reason, you don't need it, because the only thing they're really good for is killing a lot of people in a short amount of time. And I agree with my dad. I also agree with my friend Rhonda Hart, whose daughter was killed in her art classroom in 2018 in Santa Fe, Texas. And it was pretty horrifying watching somebody you've known since your children were both toddlers post on Facebook all day about the fact that she couldn't find her daughter, and then to find out that she was killed in her art classroom. I support the March for Our Lives Peace Plan. You can Google March for Our Lives Peace Plan, which is a peace plan that is incredibly well researched and detailed about how to address all types of gun violence in our society. And it is a great plan, and people should take a look at it. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Kimberly. And Mike Franken, excuse me, I'm on the road. That was it. That was it for that question. Technical difficulty here in the Hogg House. Our next question was submitted by the audience. It comes from Sioux Center in Sioux County. And we will start with Theresa Greenfield for this one. We know that Senator Ernst and the Republicans will use immigration to try to divide and scare Americans. Theresa, what would you do to handle those attacks? And what specific legislation would you support to reform U.S. immigration policy?
Well, thanks, Sioux Center, for speaking up and joining us tonight. Look, Iowa's a state of small towns and small businesses, and we know that immigrants have been a wonderful part of our communities. Why we've led the way on showing how to welcome immigrants. Republican Governor Bob Ray welcomed refugees so many years ago. You know, I believe we have to have immigration reform. We have to modernize it. It has to be humane. It has to have a focus on safety at our borders, of course, but it has to keep families together. And we certainly can't have kids separated from their parents. And it has to be a system that allows us to grow our economy. Right here in Iowa, we have a group called the Iowa Compact on Immigration, and they put out a great plan on how we can focus on growing our economy and modernizing our immigration system, staying safe, and of course, keeping our families together. And we can do that and start by passing the Dreamers Act. I look forward to doing that as your next senator. Thank you.
Thank you, Theresa. And now we'll go to Eddie Mauro. Eddie, what would you do to handle their attacks, and what specific legislation would you support to reform U.S. immigration policy?
Yeah, well, thanks for asking, Rob and Sioux Center for that great question. This is one of the issues that I led with as a community organizer. I remember vividly standing at the top of a ladder in the Capitol Rotunda in front of hundreds of immigrants and Iowans and others to support our dreamers, to support driver's licenses for undocumented immigrants, to support so much more to take care of people. Right now, today, we need to combat the fear. We need to talk about justice. We got to combat the misguiding and talk about hope. And that has to do with a comprehensive immigration reform policy that brings people out of the shadows, that has our DACA kids be recognized, that makes sure that our dreamers are allowed to continue on. We need to talk about a lawful border that is secure, but also works so people can come in and out in an expeditious fashion. And right now, that whole thing is being created to create this era of fear and distrust. We need to talk about what we're doing for forward-thinking diplomacy, Rob and Sioux Center, and what we're doing in Central America, because folks should probably want to stay home if we make sure we invest in those areas. There's a lot we need to be doing. It's tough to do in 60 seconds, but this has been an issue I've been leading on for a very long time. Forward-thinking diplomacy will take us a long way. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you, Eddie. Next is Cal Woods. Cal, what would you do to handle their attacks, and what specific legislation would you support to reform U.S. immigration policy?
Thanks, Rob. We need to have a path for citizenship so folks who've been here undocumented for many years and been law-abiding citizens, hardworking citizens, tax-paying citizens, we need to provide an opportunity, a path to citizenship for those folks, a path to citizenship for the dreamers who, for many of them, the only home they've ever known is the United States of America. And we need to take a look at our foreign policy and foreign aid. Let our foreign policy and foreign aid reflect our values. There are some stable regions, some stable nations in Central America, and some very unstable situations in Central America, in Honduras and Guatemala and El Salvador. We can't welcome 25 million people here to the United States, but we can help those countries promote democracy and promote stability. So those folks who want to find opportunity and safety and security and equality and democracy in their home nations can, with a little bit of help from nations like the United States. Thanks for the question.
Thank you, Cal. Kimberly Graham, you're next. What would you do to handle the attacks, and what specific legislation would you support to reform U.S. immigration policy?
Well, I think like most areas, how you handle attacks is you listen to people and then you respond to people in a way that they can relate to. You tell people's stories. Our Latinx and immigrant outreach coordinator, Natalie Espinoza, just became a US citizen in December after 15 years and paying thousands of dollars to get there. It needs to take a lot less time and be a lot cheaper to become a United States citizen. We need more immigrants, particularly in rural Iowa. We have some communities that really, really are thriving because unfortunately, other than the immigrants, the population is leaving those rural communities. But with the immigrant population that has really begun to thrive in some of our smaller towns in rural Iowa, we've seen an economy take a rebound in some of those areas. We need to have work permits, a meaningful work permit system so that people who want to come and work here in Iowa can do so, and they can be documented, and they don't have to be always looking over their shoulders because they are here undocumented. We need to repeal and get rid of the 3 and 10-year bans. We need to make DACA recipients citizens immediately. I went down to Matamoros for 5 days last September and volunteered to help asylum seekers at the southern border. And that was absolutely mind-blowing, how we are violating international law and violating our own due process. So we need to do a lot better by immigrants, and I would be a loud advocate for immigrants in the United States Senate.
Thank you, Kimberly. And next is Mike Franken. Mike, what would you do to respond to the attacks by Republicans, and what specific legislation would you support to reform U.S. immigration policy?
Thanks, Rob. Just a question, or just a correction to the record. I didn't answer that last question very well about assault weapons. Yes, I am all for a ban of such weapons. We can go on and on about that. But I was chief of legislative affairs on Capitol Hill when the McCain-Durbin bill was introduced. We had 62 or so senators signed up for that bipartisan agreement, and we could have had more, but it was held up by the Republican majority then, for political reasons. And I find it a rather logical disconnect that my home city, my precious place where I went to high school, Sioux Center, Iowa, which is a remarkably affluent and successful area and forward thinking, are so reliant on immigrants that the Republicans would be inimical to its future. Let's face it, we're wasting money on the wall. We need to be working that money in a more refined manner to bring the necessary visa holders, green card holders in here to work. We need to double the necessary immigration officers from source countries. We need to ensure that the infrastructure and development efforts are there for those source countries. We need paths to citizenship for DACA people and other long-term residents. And we need to enact a comprehensive plan that emphasizes the worker expanded visa program. This is a big deal for Africa and the world. If you want to talk about immigration, let's talk about Africa, because that's where it's coming from next. Thank you much.
Thank you, Mike. The next question submitted by the audience comes from 2 viewers in Humboldt County. And we'll start with Eddie Mauro. We are currently experiencing a crisis in the meat processing industry here in Iowa, as well as other states. Eddie, how would you balance the needs of Iowa's livestock producers, the people who work in the plants, and the consumers who want meat products? What is the federal government's role in helping the food supply chain become more resilient?
So it starts by making sure that we have a true rural ag policy that favors the family farmer, and make sure we're working on incomes and providing real meaningful income. We need to change the economic outlook for what's going on in farms today. We got too much money going in the corporate pockets, but not enough going into Iowa farmers. And that dynamic needs to change. We need to end the practice of allowing big meat packers like Tyson, Smithfield, and JBS to own livestock and monopolize the flow of processed food that keeps farm incomes down. It prevents competition, suppresses prices for all agricultural commodities. We need to build and maintain and develop a 21st century infrastructure that guarantees making sure that we have the right kind of tools and resources into our communities. Too much consolidation going on. We need to make sure that we're breaking up the vertical silo and expanding and spreading out so we have the right kind of supply and demand that really meets the needs of the family farmer. But right now we have a big issue, Rob, with the workers as well. So we need to balance out what we're doing for workers. And we're on the verge of announcing a coalition this week to go out and stand up and fight for workers, because we're putting them in a very tough spot. We got to make sure we have the right balance of both what we're doing for our family farmers, protecting workers on the front lines.
Thank you, Eddie. Next is Cal Woods. Cal, what would you do to try to balance the interest in the meat processing industry, and what role should the federal government play?
Thanks, Rob. First of all, food security is a part of our national security, and we cannot allow our national security to be put in the hands of foreign nationals, and especially the Chinese, who owns Smithfield Foods. We need to ban foreign ownership of any packing plant and any hogs. 1 out of 4 hogs in America is owned by the Chinese. It's unconscionable that we're putting our food security and national security in the hands of foreign nationals, and in particular in the hands of Chinese. We need to eliminate vertical integration, as Eddie had suggested. Too much of the money that is generated in the hog industry is leaving our state. Too many of our rural counties now have more hogs and less revenue than they have in decades. So we need to eliminate the vertical integration. We need to eliminate foreign ownership. And just like we had banks that were too big to fail back 12 years ago, we now have packing plants that some people would suggest are too big to fail. If they're too big to fail, they're too big to exist in that format. So we need to break up foreign ownership, vertical integration, and these massive hog plants that are just opportunities for a pandemic like our coronavirus to generate itself.
Thank you, Cal. Next is Mike Franken. Mike, how would you balance the interest in the meat processing industry, and what role should the federal government play in helping us become more resilient?
Well, that's a long discussion, but I've worked multiple years at Supreme Packing Company in Sioux Center, Iowa, starting when I was still a teenager. There are issues you could be doing, and we should have more vocal opinions about this from the unions, frankly, and some of the organizations. We need to slow the line. We need to train additional watch sections. We need to break the hours between the necessary watch sections so that we don't cross pollute each other with necessary with COVID, et cetera. I mean, there's some intricate things we can do. All of these things are well described in the pandemic simulations that this country has done, that this administration has chosen not to follow. But we need to also look at the value equation, where the producers of our products are on the tail end of profits, and the processors are always getting their percentage, and now are going to claim that they need assistance when they haven't really planned well for this. So, I mean, yes, food supply is a national security issue, but if you look at the power companies, what did they do to keep the power online? They made allowances, which the food processors have not done. Ask why we still have electricity, because they were smart about it, whereas our processors were not. There's blame to be had here, and there'll be hearings afterwards, I assure you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Theresa Greenfield, how would you balance the interests in the meat processing industry, and what role should the federal government play?
Thanks, Humboldt County, for the question. You know, I believe COVID-19, this pandemic, is going to be one of the most consequential events of our lifetime. It has disrupted our lives, our communities, our economy, our jobs, education, travel, our supply chain. And Iowans are dying. You know, we need to remember that this is a tough time and that we're all in it together. We can't lose sight of the fact that producers are in it with our meat processors, with our grocers who are providing the end product, from people who are delivering and driving the trucks. We are in this together. But I'll tell you, our essential workers, they need essential protections, and the federal government can help with that, setting temporary standards to make sure there's adequate PPE and daily testing, and work with every industry to make adjustments in their processes to protect workers. We can do that. And you know what else we can do? We can provide paid sick leave to every worker, so they don't have to choose whether they go to work sick, or whether they stay home and take care of their families and lose their jobs. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Theresa. Kimberly Graham, how would you balance the interests, and what role should the federal government play?
Well, first of all, the role that the federal government should never play is the one that the current president has taken when he ordered all of these plants to remain open. That is absolutely shameful and appalling, and it's going to cost people their lives, to put it quite bluntly. So we need to, there's been a lot of good answers here, and things that I won't repeat, as far as antitrust, that we need to enforce our antitrust laws so that these monopolies cannot get to the size that they are. We need to, our government role, one of the important government roles can be to support small and medium-sized businesses. and can be to make sure that small and medium-sized businesses have a real chance at making it. And again, that starts with antitrust legislation and not allowing these companies to get this big. We also need to have stronger unions and more unions, because those unions usually fight pretty hard for workplace safety. We have seen some erosion, however, of the power of unions, and we need to do everything that we can in the United States Senate and everywhere to bolster the strength of unions. You know, you asked how you balance the needs of the livestock producers, the workers, and the consumers, how you balance those. The answer is you don't balance those. Meaning there is no life that is worth a burger. I don't care how good it is. So I understand that people want their beef and are concerned that there might not be, the meats available to them. But the fact is that in the short term, if we need to shut down meatpacking plants to make sure that people aren't getting sick and dying because they're having to work in unsafe conditions or choose poverty instead, then we need to shut them down temporarily to get ahead of this. Thanks.
Thank you, Kimberly. The final question from the audience comes to us this afternoon it was submitted by multiple people across the state, and it's pretty simple. And we'll start with Cal Woods. Cal, why do you think you are the best candidate to beat Joni Ernst?
Yeah, Rob, thanks very much. I worked as a reporter for 16 years, and one of my jobs was asking the tough questions. And I think there's a number of tough questions to be asked of Joni Ernst. Why did she stick up for the gas and oil and refinery industry and not Iowa farmers when she said very little about Trump's EPA handing out renewable fuel standard waivers to not just the small refineries, but the large refineries as well? And it cost American farmers probably 1.4 million demand of 1.4 million bushels of corn. We need to ask Joni Ernst tough questions about why she didn't stand up for American farmers when Trump had his ill thought out, poorly executed, poorly planned trade war with China. And where was Joni Ernst? From her, we heard nary a whimper. We need to ask Joni Ernst those tough questions. And that's what I'll be doing when I have an opportunity to confront Joni Ernst on why she hasn't stood up for farmers, but has done a very good job standing up for the oil industry and the Wall Street investment bankers and hedge fund managers.
Thank you, Cal. Next is Kimberly Graham. Kimberly, why do you think you are the best candidate to beat Joni Ernst?
Well, thanks for the question. It's an important one, a very, very important one. So there's a couple of things that I would say to that. First of all, I believe that it is really critical that we run somebody who is in this Democratic nominee, whoever's the Democratic nominee, who is the polar opposite of Joni Ernst. Joni Ernst has sided with an administration that supports traumatizing children, locking up kids in cages, separating them from their families, and inflicting trauma on them that they will never recover from in many, many cases. I've spent the last 20 years of my life standing up and fighting for abused kids and for families in the Iowa courts. The exact opposite of what Senator Ernst stands for. Senator Ernst won, and we have to remember this, because people were desperate to get corporate money out of politics. And that might seem funny and ironic now, but what was her slogan that propelled her to win? Make them squeal. What did that mean? Get big money out of politics. People are tired of politics as usual. None of us who are running for this seat have ever held elected office before. I think that's a good thing. But what I've done is stood up and fought for Iowans for the last 20 years, not only no corporate PAC money, which is frankly easy street, but I've not taken any corporate lobbyist money either, and I never will. I am here to stand up for my son, the people I've represented for 20 years, and that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Kimberly. Theresa Greenfield, why do you think you are the best candidate to beat Joni Ernst?
Thank you, Rob. You know, I am the best candidate to defeat Senator Ernst this November, and I'm looking forward to that fight. You know, we're going through tough times right now, and we need somebody who understands what it's like to be tough and get back on their feet. You know, as a recent president of small business, I know the struggles of all the Main Street businesses whose lights are off right now, and that they're going to need someone to help them open their doors. As a mother of four, I absolutely know the struggles at the kitchen table. Folks are working hard to make ends meet and stretch a dollar during this very difficult time. But I'm also a scrappy farm kid, and I know how to work hard, and I'm going to take my grit and my resolve and my resiliency and go to every county and every township to fight for every single vote And we've built the strongest grassroots team to make that happen. I'm so thrilled to have the endorsement of the AFL-CIO and so many others. And I intend to put Iowa first, and I'm not taking one dime of corporate PAC money. Thanks.
Thank you, Theresa. Next is Mike Franken. Mike, why do you think you are the best candidate to beat Joni Ernst?
I thank you, Rob. Well, I don't talk about helping humanity, I do it. I'm the only candidate that has legislative experience. I have more time on Capitol Hill than Joni Ernst does ×2. I don't do national security as a pastime, I lived it. I understand infrastructure like only an engineer and a physicist can. I know technology from machine learning to cyber. I do women's rights, not on a local level, but on a continent-wide area to bring women up from their place in Africa to a place of equality with men. I've led large organizations, 6,000 people, started from the ground up and got the necessary legislation and funding done. I have combat experience, lots. I have national service. If you want to talk about how to keep your sons and daughters out of combat, speak with me. Environmental stewardship, I'm on the board for think tanks that actually do that for a living, including water purity issues at the Stimson Center. I'm a special needs, foster care, mental illness, foster and adoption expert, having lived it. A corporate board experience, both profit and for-profit, nonprofit and philanthropic. I started a large organization from the ground up. I know trade, I know agency, I know debt relief, I know international relations. I'm not owned by anybody, certainly only by the politic of Iowa. I look forward to being your senator of leadership.
Thank you, Mike. Eddie Mauro, why do you think you are the best candidate to beat Joni Ernst?
So quite simply because I can reach into corners of the state the way that nobody else in this campaign have. And it's something I've been doing nearly all my life. And you're going to need a Robert Kennedy type of a senator candidate that can reach out and talk about a new era in politics, a new frontier to move us forward transformatively. Farmers want to know what you're going to do to stand with them alongside of them. Teachers in rural communities want to know how you're going to lift them up and make sure that they can teach with both arms in front of them instead of one arm tied behind their back. Our small business owners, something that I've been working with for a long time, want to know how they're going to recover through this crisis in front of them. So here's a candidate that can reach into communities the way that nobody else can. That's already demonstrated that for 3 decades now. It's going to lead us through this crisis and to a new future, a new era in politics. And I look forward to being that leader. Thanks for asking.
Thank you, Eddie. Now it's time for the closing statements from our candidates. I want to thank all of you again for joining us this afternoon. And a couple reminders. First, Benton, Iowa, and Poweshiek County Democrats will be having another forum like this next Saturday, May 9th at 4 p.m. to hear from their state Senate candidates who are in a primary, Alvin Aragon and Ivy Schuster, as well as the state House candidates who are unopposed, Sarah Smith in House District 76 and Ruby Boddicker in House District 75. We also want to remind you to request your absentee ballot before Friday, May 22nd, and mail in your ballot before Monday, June 1st. Candidates, your closing statements. We'll start with Mike Franken.
Mike Franken here. Nothing prepared on this other than do speak with those who do not have a history of voting. Ask them to get a absentee ballot, to choose a side, and to research the issue, research the individuals associated with it, and to vote. Please, please, please vote. Let's make this a big, big initiative. We're going to have difficulty coming out of this pandemic. I would urge that we get this country, we energize this nation with an infrastructure bill that talks about a comprehensive renewal of roads, water distribution, renewable energy, broadband, digitized medical systems, legislate a focus on low-income areas, enact the Clyburn bill, work rural area, inner city, urban areas, bring the nation together with a volunteer national service program greatly expanded to what we presently have in AmeriCorps. Make it something that young people today talk about. Use this moment in time to bring this nation to a new horizon. Work on our locks, dams, so we become an intermodal zone, both east and west in Iowa. The veins and arteries of life are our economies. Iowa is central to this. We need a leader. Happy to be that person. Thanks for doing this today, Rob, and thanks to the counties involved. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Kimberly Graham, your closing statement.
Thank you. And thanks to everyone who put this event together today. I really appreciate the opportunity. So I think I may be the only one of the five of us who has been working and still is working throughout this entire campaigning process. I venture a guess, am the one of us with the lowest net worth, because I have nothing but student loan debt after 20 years of paying my student loan payments on time every month. I have struggled to pay for my own health insurance as a single mom since my son was 7 years old. I understand what it is like, not 10 years ago or not 30 years ago, but I understand what it's like in 2020 to struggle financially in the United States of America and work hard and not get ahead. And there are some very important systematic and structural things that we can change in this country to make it truly a land of opportunity for everyone. But we have to elect regular working people in order to get there. People that know what it is like to be struggling, to open up that insurance premium increase letter that comes every April in the mail and wonder how the heck you're going to squeeze another $100 a month out of your budget. So I understand. And I would say this, in spite of me not having any connections to wealth or wealthy people or being well connected, there was a March Des Moines Register Mediacom poll, and our campaign came out on top in that poll with the most highest name recognition and the highest favorability rating. And that's because probably a lot of things, a great team that I have, a small team, but a great team. And it's from putting 40,000 miles on my car from last June until March when we had to stop. You have to be willing to go everywhere and listen to everyone, including and especially the people that do not agree with you. And as a mediator and as an attorney for kids and parents, I have those skills. I have the skills to represent us in Washington, D.C., and I would be proud to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Kimberly. Theresa Greenfield, your closing statement.
Thank you, everyone. This was fantastic. Great questions, great conversation. And look, we all know we're not going to be able to take action on any of the issues that we care so much about, whether it's climate change or healthcare, rebuilding our markets, and recovering from COVID, unless we win this race, and we can win it. I'm running to put Iowa first, and I'm going to leave you with this thought. You know, after my first husband died and I got back on my feet, I got my very first job, and it was for $8 an hour. You know what else I got? I got my dignity back, because absolutely everybody wants the dignity of providing for their families, even young widows like me. And I'm going to take the fight for hardworking families, hardworking Iowans with me when I'm your senator, and I can barely wait to do that. So join our team. Go to greenfieldforiowa.com, cast your vote for our campaign in this next June 2nd primary.
Thank you, Theresa. Eddie Mauro, your closing statement.
You know, we're all here today because we share one thing in common. We're ready to see the devastation coming from Joni Ernst's time in the U.S. Senate end. This election is a referendum on leadership, and we need to elect the right type of leader if we have any chance of ousting Ernst. We need a leader who can take the tough questions, who reaches out to voters all across Iowa, not just big donors, and who's prepared to stand up and fight for all those who are being left behind. And I've walked the walk. My experience in rural Iowa as a teacher and a coach, today as a business leader who employs over 70 people and touching small business owners in every community, as a community advocate, that's all deeper than any other in this race. I've also done work in Africa and Central America and around the US, but most importantly, I've done the work right here in Iowa. So I don't just talk about improving rural schools and rural hospitals and mental health services, protecting Medicare and Social Security for rural seniors. I don't just talk about creating a fair economy that includes rural business and workers and a farm bill that truly meets the needs of the family farmer first. I've been fighting for you already. So I hear you when you say we need to do better. I hear you when you say our schools are crumbling. I hear you when you say our healthcare and mental health services are not acceptable. I hear you when you say daycare is not accessible. I hear you when you say wages are being depressed. And when you say that the talent's leaving their communities. And I hear you when you say you want to help feed America, but you need to make a living to do so. And that's why you need to send me to the US Senate. I'll be a voice for rural Iowa to make tomorrow better than today. Please go see how at eddiemauro.com. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Eddie. And finally, Cal Woods, your closing statement.
Rob, thanks very much to you and everybody who participated today. I appreciate the opportunity. You know, we have some big challenges ahead of us. And when we get past this pandemic, we will still have our overarching existential and moral challenge of our time, and that is our climate crisis. If we don't address that, the young folks who are teenagers and children today, they're going to see some really challenging things that we do not want them to see. This is where I put in a plug for Rob's great book, America's Climate Century. If you haven't read it, it's a great read. It's a roadmap for what we do today, tomorrow, a year from now, 5 years from now, and 10 years from now to address our climate crisis. And it's a sense of urgency that we need. An oil company executive once said, we didn't end the Stone Age because we ran out of stones, and we won't end the oil age because we've run out of oil. It'll be because we found better opportunities, better alternatives, and we have. We'll have a cleaner, greener economy. We need to unleash the power of engineers and visionaries and architects and electricians and carpenters and everybody who'll be involved in transforming our energy system and our transportation system to remove carbon from our atmosphere and leave our kids and grandkids with the kind of opportunity, the cool, temperate climate and planet that we all grew up in. We owe them that. That's what I'll be fighting for when I go to Washington. Thank you, everyone, for your time today and participating. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Cal. And that concludes today's forum. I want to thank all the candidates for participating and for your willingness to run and to serve. I know a little bit about that. It's a lot of work. So everybody give a round of applause to our candidates here, wherever you are. I also want to thank the Benton, Iowa, and Poweshiek County Democratic parties for sponsoring today's event. If you're able to contribute to those county parties and to the candidates running for state, legislative, county, and of course our statewide candidates, please do that. Thank you to all the viewers for taking the time to be a part of our democracy. And please remember to ask for your ballot before May 22nd, to vote by mail no later than June 1st. Please take care and stay safe. And goodbye from today's The Primary Forum. Thank you very much for joining us, and have a good afternoon and evening. Goodbye.